Topic here is architecture in the Trade Center. Completing this screencast. I hope you have already completed the model using the PDF file out of paper to complete the World Trade Center facility, including the North Tower, South Tower, and the Marriott. Going to begin with the Empire State Building, which was the tallest skyscraper being built in the 1920s. For the most part, in the 20s, construction topped off around 80 floors. When you're looking at the Empire State Building, what I want you to take note of is the bricks, as well as how the building kind of goes in. Whereas a trade center, they're just straight down. And so just think about that. If you're creating a building 107 floors, that's going to be difficult when you start stacking one floor on top of another. So I want you to just keep thinking about the Empire State Building. In 1945, there was a plane that had crashed into the Empire State Building. And keep in mind that the Trade Center facility was not completed. It was not even in construction at this particular point. And so the thing here is the Empire State Building is going to be something that's used as, test data, information to try to figure out how can you build two towers that are 107 floors. Just another image of the crash. If you were to take a look at the reading City in the Sky, combine that with Twin Towers and the 9/11 Commission report, which is the bulk of the information for this particular screencast here. Looking at this particular point here, it's simply just talking about somebody surviving the plane crash that happened to the Empire State Building. If you look at this particular clip, you would hear this individual talk about how the Trade Center was built and able to take a direct hit from, I believe he says, a 747 plane. You can take a look at that clip there. When we're looking at this image here, you see the North Tower, the South Tower with 175 about to hit the South Tower. The North Tower, although it's hit first, this thing falls second. I want you to take a look at this particular line right here. These are the sky lobbies. There's another one down here. Notice the antenna, which is how you can tell the difference between the North Tower and the South Tower. Anyway, so the Port Authority was a agency that was created by New York and New Jersey to try to regulate trade and also to act as a kind of an odd entity, not really a government agency, but it is a government agency. They can issue bonds and they can kind of operate like a corporation. So this is kind of a weird situation with the Port Authority. Anyway, this was created in 1921, and it is going to allow an organization to control the ports, the airports, and it's going to deal with trade between New York and New Jersey. Austin Tobin, who was the director of the Port Authority, this individual is going to be the guy really lobbying for the Port Authority to build this particular trade center. This trade center was designed to deal with trade. I don't recall the exact percentage, but a certain amount of space only could be rented out to businesses that were dealing with international trade, which is what this individual argued to justify the building of the two towers. Here you see the architect here, and there you see those sky lobbies, which is going to be crucial. Later on, I'll come back to this. This guy right here definitely was somebody who was viewed as a amateur, even though he was not amateur considering the buildings that he was about to come up with. And so this guy said he was afraid of heights. This guy had some drinking problems, and probably because he's under a lot of stress to build these two towers and meet a lot of deadlines. He was definitely somebody who was into lines for some reason, and you can see that in some of the other buildings. Guy Tazzoli, director of the World Trade Center. This is the guy that Tobin picks to kind of head this particular construction project. So a lot of what happens is going to fall under this guy's watch, and then he will report to this individual here. Tobin's dying wish. So His dying wish, as he's close to death, was to go back to the trade center and just kind of marvel at what he had created. Notice again the lines. I could see the sky lobby right here. This thing is called the tridents, the trees that go all the way up, and this point right here is anchored into the ground. The Trade Center site, what I want you to think about as you're looking at this image is that there are numerous Trade Center buildings, 7, 6, 1, 2, 3, and they are all on this particular uh, section of New York City, Lower Manhattan. This area, they did have to dig this out, and the dirt was then placed across the street, and I'll address that later on, in a landfill to create space. So here you see the North Tower and the South Tower. There was a shopping mall that was underneath, and New Jersey would be in this particular direction here, and there would be the path subway um, tubes that would go into this part of Lower Manhattan. And here you see an image of the shopping mall. Why is this important? Well, it's important because there are numerous reports when the planes were hit, especially the North Tower, that people are, in this mall getting coffee, getting their paper in the morning, getting ready to go to work, and the jet fuel pours down and blows open the doors in the elevator, and creates a fireball situation. So a lot of reports of people in this particular area that had experienced a fireball situation, and I'll address that later on. Here you see Trade Center 3, another significant thing because you are able to travel underground. And if you are really familiar with this area, it probably would have helped you survive because you can get from the North Tower to the South Tower and possibly use this particular building as an escape route. But that would be that would assume that everything underground. So there are three innovations that I'm going to talk about here: the bathtub, the central staircase, and the exterior. Those lines that go up and down, they're unique and they're there for a reason. Um, when you're thinking about this. When I said 107 floors and going up to 110, I just wanted to point out that the last floor you had a observation deck and you had a restaurant that was there. So just something to kind of point out there. Notice air conditioning units can power 15,000 homes. All right, so let's take a look at some of the specifics. So here we're looking at the bathtub, which is this wall, this exterior wall that is right here. And the bathtub, if we go back to this image here, is built around this particular perimeter right here. Keep in mind that there is water in this particular area, and that will be of a concern as they're trying to figure out how to build these. Here you could see the path tubes right here. And the plan here is to dig all of this out. And as I said, put it across the street. In this image, you could see the North and the South Tower. And you could see the tridents being anchored into the ground right here. So this area right here is all dug out. And this is the street level right here. When I said the tridents, that would be this area right here. This section where it branches out, these are called the trees, and these would be the section that's anchored into the ground. So again, this point right here, this point, you can see them right here going straight into the earth. And you would have this space right here where you could build your mall. So the building, these tridents are going to be anchored into this particular area right here after you dig out. So you see the street. I want to say the number about 60 feet, maybe 70 feet distance between hitting bedrock, which would be here, and the actual street. So when you're looking at normal construction, when you're looking at this image, what I want you to think about is this rebar. And these metal beams are going up, down, and they are there to give the building strength. Now, the problem is, if you notice this rebar, there seems to be a lot of these metal rods. So when you're making this building, you would have to build a wall around this, otherwise people would see it. So there's a lot of places where you're just going to see walls because the walls are there to cover up the rebar. But why is that significant? Well, the Trade Center is built differently. Notice how there is no rebar. Again, this is a street level anchored into the bedrock, and there's open floor space. I want you to think of it like a donut. Maybe I can find one of those images there. Donut image right here. So all of the steel, rebar, all of that stuff is just located in the middle. So this is all open space. Old construction, you would have all of the metal beams or the rebar going up. And again, that goes back to the point that I wanted to address with the image here, because the rebar is going to allow less retail space. In this image, I'm showing you a fence post, and this is about those tridents being anchored into the ground. If you ever look at a fence, you see the post and you see the fence panel. So these fence posts are in the ground, usually about 2 feet, and they're there to keep the post secured, anchored into the ground. I want you to think about that concept as you're thinking about going up, those 110 floors. Is the wind going to be able to knock this thing over? If you have this thing anchored into the ground somehow, that is going to give you some sort of stability. So the wind is definitely a problem, which is why skyscrapers usually ended in the 80 floor range in the 1920s and the 1930s. Going up into the hundreds was going to definitely be problematic because the wind would put a lot of force on the building, and people in the trade center, when they worked, they said that they could feel this thing swaying about 4 feet. They actually had conducted tests to determine whether or not people were going to be nauseous as they're on some of the higher floors. But it was often reported that people, the higher up you went, you could actually feel the building move. And that's a result of the building being, anchored in the ground, and, using a kind of a strut suspension method that I'll address later to allow the building to kind of move, to sway in these particular directions. So the retaining wall right here, we're looking at this right here. Somebody has taken out some of the dirt and they built this retaining wall to prevent the dirt from here from just spilling over. And this is what this would be called, the retaining wall. So I want you to think of a retaining wall very similar to the way I was describing over here, that bathtub scenario right here. It's pretty much a retaining wall. That is right there. We can see the retaining wall would be in this particular area of the street. And again, they're going to go pretty much one floor at a time. So we have the street level here, and they're just going to start stacking 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floor, and just keep going all the way up. So I want you to think about here, if you stacked 110 pancakes just on top of each other, what is the likelihood of those things toppling over? So the exterior, those lines, that is what's going to be used to kind of hold this in, and I'll address that again later on. So the first thing they have to do is build this bathtub, and the way they go about doing that around this whole perimeter right here is they use what was called the slurry system. So they build this in a section. So I want you to think about it, like if you were just to dig this entire area out, it definitely would be problematic. It's just not going to work. So what they did was they actually just dug into the earth, this line area. Then they, went down, and as they went down digging this dirt out, little by little, they pumped it up with what was called a slurry mix, where they put this concrete-like material that was, its consistency was more liquid than anything that was really going to harden. And as they dug this dirt out, they filled it up with the slurry to try to give this support so the dirt just wouldn't, come in. Then they put this metal crate into this particular, dugout hole. And as they put this metal crate in, the slurry mix would just come out. So it says right here, slurry out. And then they poured concrete in. And that's how they built this slurry wall. So this was built one time, just one section at a particular time. Then once that concrete hardened, then they would dig this out. So they're doing that along that entire perimeter. So if we're looking here, there's a little section here. So just imagine this whole section filled with dirt. Let's say like this section was the first thing that they were going to dig out. They would start pulling the dirt out, pumping in the slurry mix, and that process would continue. Dirt out, slurry in. And then you would put that metal rebar in there, and as that metal rebar goes in, it would force all of the slurry out, and you pour in cement. And then once that section hardens, you would now have concrete. and you just go on to the next section. So that has to be done for the entire Trade Center section. Why is this significant? This was a really big concern after 9/11. This was actually one of the first things they needed to figure out if this slurry mix was compromised in any way. As I said before, you have New Jersey and you have water on this particular area. So the fear was that if that wall was breached, that water would come in and flood lower Manhattan. So one of the first things they needed to do was verify whether or not this was intact, that particular wall. These lines, these areas right here, these are actually called tiebacks. So if we're looking at this image here, you could see this is actually the tieback, but we would be looking at it on the outside. So if you were kind of on the inside of the slurry wall, let's just say you were right here, or you were right here. This tieback is actually a metal rod, a bunch of them, that are anchored into the ground on an angle. Let's go back to that image right here. So again, like this, we have to, just imagine that this is going into dirt right here. And so you would be looking at this, if you were on the inside, of the bathtub, once everything was out, you would be looking at this right here. So you actually don't ever see the tie back, the metal rods. They would be going in this particular direction right there. So the bathtub, as I said, you have this whole area with all of this dirt that is now out. It gives you an opportunity to now start dealing with that whole secure area. So when the towers actually fall, all of that rubble is inside of the bathtub. I want you to think about, we're going back here, these floors just start falling on top of each other. And as they fall, they fill up this bathtub with floors. And before you know it, they just overspill right out of the bathtub, and they just form this pile, which is what these people are standing on. Right there's the pile. I know I have a video. Let me see if I could find. Where's my video? Port Authority Construction.
As each section was completed, 25-ton cages of metal reinforcement rods were lowered into the slurry-filled trench. With the cage in place, concrete was poured in. Since the concrete had a greater density than the slurry was forced up out of the trench and could be used for the next section. In this way, an underground wall was built completely sealing the site. Excavation began. As each section of the slurry wall was revealed, workers drilled holes through the wall and casings were pushed through down to bedrock on the far side. Steel tendons were then inserted through these holes and socketed into bedrock, bracing the wall against external pressure. More than 1 million cubic yards of dirt had to be removed to make way for the Trade Center's foundations. The excavated earth was placed in the Hudson River adjacent to the site to create more than 23 acres of new land.
So there you go. So feel free to take a look at that particular YouTube video. We'll see where I go with Architecture Day 2.